Hey, this is Jeff Ratcliffe here. Let's talk about the value in daily fantasy for a minute. The big prizes, yeah, they're attractive, but you have to finish in the top 2% out of thousands of experts to win any real money. So even on your best day, you still feel like you're losing. Now you can play something better. Stat Hero. Stat Hero is a house-based game that combines the best of daily fantasy and survivor pools. Each Stat Hero contest lasts multiple days, but requires only one entry fee, so your money lasts longer. Yes, you can play multiple days with only one entry fee. Stat Hero gives you smaller contests and more chances to win, and no more competing with sharks or experts ever, because your only competition is Stat Hero itself. You play Stat Hero, you beat Stat Hero, you get paid by Stat Hero. Survive the game and download Stat Hero today and see how the face of daily fantasy has changed. Finally, a game designed for the rest of us. Stat Hero now open for NFL and NBA and available on both iOS and Android. For more information, please visit stathero.com. What is up? It's Pro Football Focus Fantasy Podcast. My name is Jeff Ratcliffe, and it's Friday, November 15th. And wow. That was, well, it was a good game, except it got pretty messy there. Obviously, at the end last night, a despicable act from Myles Garrett. And as of this recording, the suspension has been handed out. He is indefinitely suspended. There are multiple players suspended here or fined. Mason Rudolph getting a fine in this one, not a suspension, but just an absolute mess. It shouldn't come to that. Hey, rivalries are fun. I love rivalries. I love them. They are really one of the best things of sports, regardless of the sport. Rivalries are freaking awesome. But when it comes to this sort of stuff, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And the suspension more than warranted here. And this is, this is a team that's turning things around, obviously. Coming off a big win against Buffalo, a tough defense, by the way. Then they go in and they beat another tough defense here on Thursday Night Football. And now you're without arguably your best defensive player for the rest of the season. Bonehead idiotic. But again, this isn't Sports Talk Radio. So let's dive into a couple quick thoughts here. One actually came from the Elite Facebook group. So if you're a subscriber here to PFF and you're an Elite subscriber, you do have access to that fantasy Facebook group. So a lot of interaction, one-on-one interaction. I'm in there all the time answering questions, trades, that sort of stuff, advice. That sort of thing. And somebody had asked me, hey, who do you like more for the rest of the season in terms of defense, the Ravens or the Steelers? And now, of course, my objective isn't necessarily to just hand you the darn fish. I want to teach you how to fish a little bit. So, of course, my answer was a little coy, and I was like, well, I don't like either of them this week, meaning I'm going to stream. I'm not going to pick up a defense and expect to ride that defense for the rest of the season. And the response was something like, really? Like, you don't like the Steelers against the Browns? And the way I look at it, and this is one of those little secrets here of what we do in the industry, don't just look at the overall, entire season's worth of data, because we have to view things in smaller chunks in the NFL. Now, granted, small sample sizes can be slightly misleading, but you can also read trends a little bit if you know what you're looking for. And what we've seen out of the Browns offense is they were trending up, and then especially last week, they looked like a very different offense with Kareem Hunt on the field. And so what ended up happening was, hey, the Steelers, yes, I'm still buying in on that defense, but they really weren't a good fantasy play as a result, because it was kind of a middle of the pack matchup. I'm going to play matchup over skilled defense any day of the week. If it's a skilled defense in a so-so matchup, and I have a bad defense in a very good matchup, believe it or not, I'm going to play that bad defense in a very good matchup. For fantasy, I know the logic doesn't make sense. It's part of why fantasy scoring is broken, because you would think good defense, good fantasy defense, but that isn't always the case. So it was my response there. You should really be streaming the rest of the way out here And hey, as I mentioned too, I want to talk really quickly about Kareem Hunt. Yet again, Duke Johnson plus. That's what he is, Duke Johnson plus. Another 6 catches, didn't really do much as a runner. And yet again, I mean, Nick Chubb was fine. Now, it looked like he was a little dinged up at the end of the game. Obviously, there was injuries across the board. You have concussion for Juju Smith-Schuster, potential concussion. I haven't seen anything further about the Deontay Johnson hit. That was absolutely brutal there. And then, of course, James Conner, yet again, can't stay healthy with that shoulder. But Chubb had 27 carries. It wasn't the most efficient night. That's a tough run defense, but volume trumps efficiency when it comes down to it. And Chubb's still going to see that volume, so I'm not worried there. And yeah, Kareem Hunt's creeping up flex territory for sure. You have to like what you're seeing there, and you just have to like the overall state of this offense going forward. There's going to be some times now, the schedule loosens up a little bit where we can use our Cleveland Browns. Almost had the OBJ touchdown too, so I like they took a shot to him downfield. Overall, in a very negative game because of what happened, for fantasy purposes, there are a few things that were positive there on the Cleveland side at least. So you got that. Silver lining. I'm always looking, man. I'm always looking on that bright side. So anyway, let's talk a little bit about DFS for this week. So we'll talk a little bit about the main slate over at DraftKings for the week. And remember, I like to build around a core of players. And at the quarterback position, you certainly have to be looking at Lamar Jackson. He's pretty darn expensive this week, though, at $7,700. So you're going to have to find some wiggle room elsewhere if you do use him. Dak Prescott in play at $6,700. Deshaun at $6,800. We're spending up for all these guys. $6,500 for Jameis. Got a good Jameis stat coming up in a few minutes. If you want to go low and dumpster dive a little bit, Kyle Allen at $5,300. Although that Atlanta defense, I'm really curious here because I watched that game back. That is a different defense without Dan Quinn pulling the strings. So we shall see. We shall see for sure. Kyle Allen's very risky. $4,600 for Driscoll. Speaking of risky, but he's $4,600. So remember back in the day, if you played DFS for a long time, remember back in the day, like you had a quarterback like Driscoll, it was like, yes, he's my cash game quarterback, like no matter what. I don't really think that way in 2019 because it doesn't work like it did in 2015. But 2015, that was like the auto play. It was like chalk of chalk. Anyway, moving to running back. Christian McCaffrey is crazy expensive at $10,500. So this one is interesting. I'm looking to fade him because he's just so expensive. How about Miles Sanders? He's starting to pop because, hey, Jordan Howard's banged up. He's dealing with a stinger and is not cleared for contact. So there's a lot of moving parts here. So Darren Sproles injured reserve. Looks like Jay Ajayi is going to be signed. He could, technically speaking, he could play basically right away if he's in shape, which if he's going to be signed, he's in shape because he already knows the offense. But Jordan Howard, I mean, this is iffy on him. If Howard sits, then Miles Sanders could be super interesting. He becomes like auto chalk at $4,100. That's super cheap. $6,900, I know, nice, I get it. For Josh Jacobs, $8,900 for Dalvin Cook. Leonard Fournette's in play for me this week. Tevin Coleman at $6,100. I'm going to throw some Bro Mixon in there at $5,500. They used him a lot last week, so I like that. I'm using Brian Hill, obviously, at $4,800 because he's so cheap. I'm going to have to take a shower after I say this, but Kalen Ballage at $4,300. Oh, that's so disgusting, but I'm going to use him at $4,300. All right, let's move over to wide receiver Michael Thomas. Super expensive, but, I mean, the floor is enormous. $7,400 on Mike Evans. I like that price point as long as Marshawn Lattimore doesn't play, and it doesn't look like he's going to, although we have to keep a close eye on that. I haven't seen a practice report for Friday, though, from them. DJ Moore, $5,900. Yes, please. Cortland Sutton, $6,000. Like that one as well. Devontae Parker is cheap. It's a tricky matchup because he's going to see Tre'Davious White. So I don't love the matchup. I could see fading him, but he's so cheap at $4,700 that I could also see using him. I'm going to have a little bit of exposure to him in this one. Deebo Samuel is interesting at $4,000 with Manny Sanders banged up. I was told that it was a pain management thing. So it's not a matter of some of these injuries, like these guys literally couldn't suit up. He could suit up. He's just going to have to deal with the pain for Emmanuel Sanders. So we'll see if he ends up playing. A couple other names here. Curtis Samuel giving you some major upside. Deeper down the list, of course, Chris Godwin, Julian Edelman, and we'll throw Julio Jones in there for good measure. He's $7,500, and we know he has major upside. All right, moving to tight ends, and Darren Waller, Zach Ertz, they're expensive this week, so if you want to pay down a little bit, a couple guys who are popping for me. Greg Olsen is really intriguing, but I tell you what, Dallas Goedert, Greg Olsen, 3,900. Dallas Goedert at 3,200. The Eagles, I'll give you a stat in a little bit about their 12 personnel, but it's really intriguing. I'll flesh this out a little bit further when I get to that stat. Eric Ebron, you have touchdown upside with him at 3,600, and Noah Fant at 3,700. Not a lot of tight ends who really popped this week for me. Defense, we'll eat some chalk. We'll go Minnesota. Washington is also in play. They're just $2,800, so they're an intriguing option. Buffalo is in play against Miami because any game is a Ryan Fitzpatrick revenge game, but any game he could completely fall apart. San Francisco in play. New Orleans because of the Jameis factor. I still like Jameis, but he's going to turn the ball over. We know that. That's like inevitable. And then Oakland, yeah, because it's Cincinnati. Sorry, Bengals fans. You're a good fan base, though. I give you that. All right, let's move on to the stats that we need to know for the remaining games here on the Week 11 slate. Let's kick things off here with the Dallas-Detroit game. Just checking in on the odds because now we do have a line. The lines were off on most books until the news came out that Stafford is sitting. So it's 6.5-point favorites here for Dallas. 47 over under. It opened, but I don't really care about open for this line because it was all up in the air all week. Anyway, Dak Prescott. Hey, we knew he was going to get off to a good start, but it's how he's continuing to produce that is really impressing me. And I tell you what, here's the stat that pops to me. So far this season, he's tied for the league lead in deep ball touchdowns with 9. The other guy, Patrick Mahomes. So we know about him. And a deep ball, by the way, at PFF, I've said this before, if you're a longtime listener, you know what it means, but it's any ball that travels at least 20 yards in the air. So for me, the more they're throwing the ball downfield, the more upside these guys have. And Dak has finally showed upside. This is a guy who, remember, first couple years in the season, you could kind of ink him in for 21 touchdown passes. In fact, I think he did that twice right off the top of my head. He did that twice. No upside really. Decent floor. I actually painted him as the low ceiling, high floor guy as one of my, safe options. And really he's an upside option now here, 10 weeks into the season. So I love that with him. And I think he does continue to produce some upside numbers, including in this contest here. Moving on to Jacksonville and Indianapolis. And it looks like Jacoby Brissett will be back, in fact, under center. So that is good there. Indy giving 2.5, open at 3.5. It's a 43.5 over under. Leonard Fournette was one of those guys, and he's like the quintessential for me this year. The never drafting him again. You know that mentality? You might even have that mentality in your leagues. You've done it yourself. Hey, people do this in fantasy football. The scorned lover. He screwed you over. Leonard Fournette specifically said, I am screwing your fantasy team over last year. And so therefore, we don't draft him, right? That's called a post-hype sleeper. And it happens a lot in fantasy. Maybe not the degree of Fournette, but it does happen a lot. So he was a massive fantasy disappointment last year. This year, well, he's pretty freaking good. Not only is he 3 down back, but he's also creating, he's averaging 3.75 yards after contact per attempt. That is a nice number right there. That's third at the position. That's really good. So 3 down roll, generating extra yards after contact. I mean, he's a locked and loaded RB1, and I do like the fact that Nick Foles is under center. Hey, not to knock Gardner Minshew, but Gardner Minshew, a rookie quarterback who's certainly going to be in the league for a while now after what he did this season. But Foles is a pro, right? He's a pro quarterback, so it's going to help this offense there. And just you have to love it if you have Leonard Fournette on your fantasy rosters. Buffalo, Miami, get excited. 6.5-point favorites for Buffalo. That moved down from an open at 7.5. Tempting. I've been making some dough, baby, on Miami recently. That's a phrase I did not think I was going to say way back in September, but hey, man, team's a different team right now. But let's talk about the other side of the ball. John Brown, so unsung. Probably, is he the most unsung fantasy wideout of 2019? He enters the week 19th among wide receivers, so he's not a rock star, but he's an every week starter. 23.7% target share. That's the 12th highest in the league through the first 10 weeks. All that volume, he's going to continue to produce, especially in this matchup. Like this matchup here for John Brown. Moving on to Denver and Minnesota. Minnesota right now giving 10. It's a 40.5 over under. And let's talk about that quarterback there, Cousin Kirk. You like that. Drew Brees is the only quarterback in the league with a higher adjusted completion percentage than Kirk Cousins. Now, if you don't know that number, it's how we can gauge true efficiency from these quarterbacks. So at PFF, sometimes people will say, hey, your target numbers look off. They're not the same as in the box score that I found at NFL.com or whatever. And there's a reason for that. So those numbers that you see in those box scores, every passing attempt essentially gets assigned as a target. But what if it's a throwaway? Like technically nobody was actually targeted on that play. So what we do is we scrub out things like that. We scrub out spikes. We scrub out plays where the quarterback is hit while throwing. You know, you can't really gauge an accurate who was the target on that play if he was hit while throwing, right? So we scrub all of those out, and I call those non-targeted pass attempts. I mean, whatever you want to call them, but we're scrubbing those out of the number. So essentially, it's the targeted throws, and you divide that number by completions and drops, right? And so, because the drop it's a receiver drop, like it's the receiver's fault, not the quarterback. You know, we're not talking about uncatchable or, you know, something like that. When the receiver blatantly makes the mistake, we count it as a drop, right? So when you add that all up, Cousins is currently at 81.5%. Now, Breeze is always off the charts in this number, but that's a really good number there for Cousins, second in the league. And that tells you high fantasy floor going forward. This is a tough matchup. Let's be clear about that, but I still think we're going to have some games with Cousins where we are going to like that. Moving on to New Orleans and Tampa Bay. Right now, 5.5-point favorites for New Orleans, over under of 49.5. Since week 3, no quarterback has more passing yards per game than Jameis Winston. He's averaging 337.6 passing yards per game, and actually ranks 8th in fantasy scoring over that span as well. But 337.6 passing yards per game, that is crazy. So the fantasy points aren't necessarily matching that because he isn't throwing a ton of touchdowns, but he is throwing to the end zone a lot. So I'm not really worried about the touchdowns. I view it kind of like this. Like it's the same thing with running backs, with receivers. I'm looking at the yardage production and the touches with those guys. So with a quarterback, obviously he's going to touch the ball when he throws it. So you're really looking at passing attempts and then passing yards. And obviously he's off the charts in passing yards. That's your floor. And then your ceiling is the touchdown production. Jameis has some big games brewing here. Just from the yardage production alone, big games are brewing. Even in this tough matchup this week, he's a back-end quarterback one. And hey, it's not pretty all the time or often with Jameis Winston, but it doesn't matter for fantasy. Doesn't matter. Does not matter. All right, moving on. Jets, Washington. Right now, Washington giving 2.5, open at 1.5. It's a 38.5 over under. Over the last month, check this out. Here's the Jets wide receiver target share breakdown. Jamison Crowder, 19.1%. Demaryius Thomas, 18.3%. Robbie Anderson, 14.5%. Entering the season, a lot of us had Anderson as the top receiver in the group, but it just is not happening. So here's what Anderson is. He's a boomer bust number 3 receiver. On the 2018 Pittsburgh Steelers, who threw the ball, that excessive amount of times, and you have a quarterback who throws for 5,000 plus, the number 3, I'll take him. On the Kansas City Chiefs, all right, I'll take him. On the New York Jets, the 2019 New York Jets, I don't want the number 3 receiver. Like, Robbie Anderson's basically a DFS punt at this point. He is not somebody that we want to roster. If you have him, you're kind of wasting a bench spot. It's unfortunate, but I think you can drop him. And that hurts me because, hey, he's a fellow Temple Owl. But, hey, got to tell the truth here. And I speak the truth. We got to cut him loose, unfortunately. All right, moving on to Atlanta and Carolina. Right now, this game, 4.5-point favorites for Carolina. That has moved down from 7 at open. 49.5 over-under has moved down from 54 at open. I am telling you, do not underestimate this Falcons defense. As crazy as it is. And I love the matchup for DJ Moore. I'm still going to play DJ Moore regardless. But it was a different defense. Watch the game back. It is a different defense. Anyway, let's talk about the running backs here for Atlanta. Freeman, sideline, Ito on injured reserve. So Brian Hill's going to be in the backfield. Plenty of volume at the college level. 349. That's a lot of carries in 2016. 349 carries in a college season. 5.3 per, so solid, but only 2.9 yards after contact per attempt. I like that number at the pro level. It's a solid number at the pro level. At the college level, it is not a solid number. It's a little low. The efficiency there, and especially low when you consider he's not playing in the Power 5. So here's the thing: can he handle a full workload? Oh yeah, yes, absolutely. Is he going to be the most efficient or explosive guy? I mean, he has decent enough speed. I shouldn't knock him there. He has 4.5 speed. But I don't know how much he's going to create on his own. So it may not be the most efficient performance. It's best to view Brian Hill as an RB2. That's where I'm ranking him. I'm ranking him as a front-end RB2 because I do think there's volume there. But it really would be surprising. Now, anything's possible in the NFL, but it really would be surprising if he posted, say, like a top 5 week. That would be surprising to me. I really just have my expectations set for RB2 production. Houston and Baltimore, man, the game of the week for me. Every week love watching Baltimore, but Baltimore 4-point favorites open at 5, so that's interesting. 51.5 over-under as you expect, one of the highest of the week other than the Monday night game. Lamar Jackson, he's leading the league in non-throw touch share. So, obviously the quarterback's going to touch the ball a lot, but when you're talking carries and catches, he has 23.9% of the Ravens' touches. The next highest quarterback is at 14%. But this stat actually is not about Lamar Jackson. The problem here with Lamar touching the ball so much for Mark Ingram owners is Ingram's touch share is just 30.9%. That's 20% lower than Dalvin Cook, who leads the league. It's just under 20%. But Dalvin Cook is leading the league. Ingram's lack of volume, it just puts a major cap on his upside going forward. It's tricky. It stinks. I feel like I keep mentioning this, but that's kind of where we are with Mark Ingram. Moving on to Arizona and San Francisco. Right now, San Francisco, 10-point favorites, 45 over under, open at 14, by the way. Jimmy G, he's a streamer, no doubt about it, but I don't expect a lot of upside out of him. Only 8.1% of his passes have gone 20-plus yards in the air this season. And that is the second lowest rate in the league. He's not taking shots downfield, so it's really difficult for guys like that to put up a big fantasy line. Just keep that in mind there with James G. Moving on to Cincinnati and Oakland, the surging. I love these guys right here. Knock on wood if you're with me. Knock on wood there. Anyway, the surging Oakland Raiders, I will never pass up an opportunity to do a terrible John Gruden or a terrible Dick Vitale. Haven't done one of those in a long time, but I'm not doing it right now. Anyway, stay tuned for a Dick Vitale some point in the podcast. This is why you listen every day, man. So Cincinnati, Oakland, wow. Little movement here. Opened at -8 for Oakland. It's up to -11. Giddy up, Oakland. 48.5 over under. That's basically a half-point movement. The Raiders, we know they're feeding Josh Jacobs, 9th in the league in carries with 168 heading into this week. But it isn't just that. How about this? Jacobs has as many runs of 15-plus yards as Christian McCaffrey. 11 of them on the season. So it's not just the volume, it's the upside out of this kid. He creates on his own. I love Josh Jacobs, to take a page out of John Gruden's book. I love him as a fantasy option. I love him as a player, and obviously you love him this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. All right, moving on to New England and Philadelphia. New England favored on the road. 3.5-point favorites here. 45 over under. Since week 4, the Eagles have run 12 personnel on 52.5% of their offensive plays. 12 personnel means 2 tight end sets. Wow. That is important information here for Dallas Goedert owners because, hey, he's on the field a whole heck of a lot. Zach Ertz is still the top tight end target. And don't panic about Zach Ertz this week. It's season long. You start Zach Ertz no matter what. But Dallas Goedert is sneaky for the stretch. They can sustain 2 top 15 tight ends for fantasy purposes. And on top of that, this week in DFS, hey, if they key Zach Ertz, giddy up, Dallas Goedert. All right, moving on to the Chicago Bears and Los Angeles Rams. 6.5-point favorites for the Rams in this contest. 40.5 over under. Relatively low scoring affair. Hey, I think Todd Gurley's been relatively good this season. You know, hey, 22nd in fantasy scoring. Before you run to Twitter and tell me how wrong I am. But here's the thing. 2.8 yards after contact per attempt. That's solid enough. And he's coming off a pretty good performance last week against the Steelers. So why isn't he putting up the good fantasy numbers? Like, I know people don't care about that sort of thing. If you're playing fantasy, you care about he isn't putting up fantasy numbers, therefore he sucks, right? Well, it's all about the volume. Remember, I said volume trumps efficiency. He's seen just 22.3% of his team's touch share this season. That is 33rd among running backs. That is not good for Todd Gurley. And the problem here, I don't see this changing anytime soon. We can't view him, unfortunately. I thought there was a chance that they gave him, the 18 to 20 touch per game share. Well, they're not doing that. And without the volume, he isn't anything better than an RB2, unfortunately. How quickly things change. All right, let's wrap it up here. Kansas City, Los Angeles Chargers. 52 over under. Giddy up Monday Night Football. 3.5-point favorites for Kansas City on the road. This is a tricky game. Love those divisional games. All right, let's talk about it. Melvin Gordon. And if you've listened to this pod for a while, you know over the summer I tweeted something out about Melvin Gordon. Last year, he really was not used heavily inside the 5-yard line. In fact, a lot of his touchdowns came on longer runs. Not long runs, not like 60-yard touchdown runs, but I'm talking anything outside of 5, the 5-yard line in terms of the line of scrimmage. If you're scoring from out there, those are unsustainable touchdowns. So I pointed this out on Twitter, and he responded to that and was not exactly a fan of Big JR here. Not that he did anything crazy, but he said basically, essentially, we'll see about that. So what we are seeing, though, is he is being used in the red zone. So, hey, credit Melvin Gordon. There you go. Look at this. Inside the 5, goal line carries. Since week 7, only Dal Cook has more goal line carries than Gordon. Gordon has had 7 of them since then. Those are extremely valuable touches for fantasy purposes. The closer you touch the ball to the end zone, the more likely you are to score. And hey, the more likely you are to score, the more likely you are to be beloved by fantasy football players everywhere, because that's 6 points, baby, plus the couple, the fraction of a point for yards, whatever. So this is good. He also looked good last week. We saw the scales tip in his favor with Austin Eckler certainly falling out of favor in early downs. And, he faces the Chiefs. They currently actually allow the most fantasy points per game to running backs. Believe it or not, the Chiefs have taken that over. So expect to see a lot of Melvin Gordon here on Monday Night Football. Obviously, you're starting him, but the challenge that we had with Melvin Gordon is when he came back from suspension, he had a stretch where the first 3 games he faced the 3 toughest run defenses in the NFL at that time, and then he played the Bears, which is still not very good. Now he's getting a little bit of a better matchup, a little stretch of games here. So Melvin Gordon back in our fantasy good graces. All right, that wraps things up for us today. So, hey, in the meantime, of course, make sure you go check out PFF.com. on Saturday mornings, my player prop. A lot of people, I see you guys, you're interested in these player prop bets. So I put out an article of my picks for the week and give you a lot. Last week, there was like over 40 recommendations. So give you those recommendations every Saturday morning at PFF.com. I'd love to do it earlier, but they don't put the darn lines out until Saturday mornings. So it is what it is, but go check that out. Go check out everything over there. And, of course, check me out on Twitter at Jeff Ratcliffe and on Instagram at Jeff Ratcliffe. And use that hashtag RatPack. That way I know you're a listener of the pod. All right. I will catch you on the flippity flip for another edition of the pod for PFF. I'm Jeff Ratcliffe, and I'm out of here.